Hi everyone, I thought I'd make a video about the Bluebeard weekend, both for those of you who've already booked so that you can begin to enter into the process with me about how I'm looking at this particular story, and for those of you who might be wondering, why would we look at a story and why would that be helpful or interesting for me as a mover? So I'll begin with the story. The story version I'm looking at is by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and it's informed by Louise von Franz's version and Angela Carter's and anything else I could find. But I love Clarissa Pinkola Estes, mainly because of the creative way she looks at stories and how she fires me up as to how I might look at things in my own life. So this is the one that I've ended up with, and some of these ideas are very much hers, and some of those are my interpretation of what she's been saying. So the story is about a predator called Bluebeard, and Bluebeard he's a very fine gentleman. He lives in a huge castle, and for reasons that are unfathomable to himself, so he says, he's never been married. He's not a difficult man, he says. He doesn't understand why. But at this moment in time, he's set his sights on these 3 daughters who live across the forest, and he contacts the mother, and he says he will come over, spend the day with them, and then see which one would be willing to marry him. The mother doesn't object, which I found quite strange. But anyway, she doesn't object, and he comes over. He brings ponies. He brings food that he's cooked himself, and he's a fine orator. And by the end of the day, the mother, at least, and the youngest daughter, they're completely enamoured. The next day when Bluebeard comes back, he sees immediately that it's the youngest daughter that's agreed to marry him, and so actually she agrees to become his prey. And for a little while everything's fine. And then he comes to her and he says, "Wife, I've got to go away for a few weeks. Here's the keys to my castle." And he hands her over a huge bunch of keys. And he says, "Bring your sisters over, have a look around. Knock yourself out. But don't use this key." And he shows her a little tiny key. It's very small and it's got scroll work on the top. And she says, "Fine, I won't. There's plenty here to see." And Bluebeard goes away and she invites her sisters over, and they make a fantastic game out of going in every single room of the castle. And by the end, there's just this little key left. And the sisters go, "What do you think's behind this door?" And she goes, "I don't think it's anything." And they go, "Really?" And they make a game out of trying to find the door which this key fits. They eventually find their way down to the cellar, and they notice that a little door in front of them is just closing. And they run and they jiggle this key in the lock and jiggle it, and eventually the door does open. It's very hard to open this door. The door does open, but it's completely dark inside. And one of the sisters says, Sisters, come, bring some light. I want to know what's going on inside this door." And when they do bring a candle, they see, to their horror, that inside this room are all the decapitated bodies and the heads piled up in the corner of all his previous wives. Some of them even have the wedding flowers in their hair. And they're absolutely petrified. They try to shut the door and at first pretend that nothing's happened, but the key won't stop bleeding. And the youngest sister, she does everything she can to cauterize this key. She tries all the methods she could think of, but it won't stop bleeding. And in fact, it runs all the way down her dress. Eventually, she gets the key, she throws it to the back of the wardrobe and throws the dress in and shuts the door. And then, of course, Bluebeard comes back. He asks her how her time's been. She goes, yeah, it's been fine. He goes, great, give me my keys back. And he sees immediately that the key's missing. She makes some excuses, but he won't have it, and he reaches out to almost to caress her, but then grabs her by the hair. And he says, oh, wife, you found out my bloody secret. And he goes to drag her down to the cellar to join the other wives. And then she has a very inspired idea. And she turns around and says, just give me 15 minutes to pray. He says, then I will willingly go to my death. And he says, okay, you have 15 minutes. And in the meantime, she sets her sisters on the parapets. And she asks them to beg her brothers to come to save her. After a few minutes, she calls up, sisters, do you see my brothers coming? They say, no, we see nothing. She goes back, she prays. Then she comes back. Sisters, do you see my brothers coming? And they say, yes, we see a whirlwind, something in the distance. We see that. And eventually the brothers come galloping up on horses, and they break down the doors and they rout Bluebeard out, and they knock him down and they cut him to pieces, and he is thrown to the buzzards. So that's the story. And on one level, we could just see it as a story about a silly girl who ends up getting rescued by the men in her life. But actually, I think it's probably a lot more useful to imagine that we are all these characters, that we are actually this fierce part who arrives on horses to rescue a part of us that, although is very bright and imaginative and full of ideas, is also very naive and is not really connected to their instincts. We're also the sisters who have a degree of caution about us. They ask the questions, they get curious, they know to stay away from Bluebeard. But also the key, who actually, it looks like it gets us into trouble, this key, but also it sheds on light on something that we've thrown into like the recesses of the cellar that maybe it's time to have a look at. There's always a choice whether we look at these things or not, whether we're open to looking at them or not. But the key is the key question. The key raises the question about something that maybe we're not looking at. And and again, although it could look on the surface that this is a very violent tale, I think that what it does do is it shows us that in our own beings, when we are very naive, when we don't recognize that something or somebody is acting like a predator in our lives, it shows up as something really shocking in our psyches. It shows up as something decapitated, lifeless, dead. Maybe something that we do need to look at to restore health to ourselves in some way. So during the weekend we'll have a look at the story, we'll read different parts of the stories, and I've made my own chapters. My first one's called His Beard Isn't That Blue. Of course it is. It's hugely brightly blue. But that's the first chapter. And we'll look at this, as dancers. How is it if we move on the dance floor towards each other or away from each other without connecting to our instincts, if we're doing that blindly or to please or to be nice. How might it be as dancers if we hold on to things instead of releasing them in a really timely, mindful way? So we'll look at this we'll look at the story in this way, and I'll be joined by we have a very experienced team. Anne, this is the 6th time in the 6th story that she's assisted me, and I'm really happy about that. We'll also be joined by Jana, and I really hope you'll join us. And if you have any questions, please do contact myself or the team. The early bird runs out on the 14th of Feb. And I hope to see you in March. Thanks, bye.